Around 10 to 30% of the world is affected by the congestion, itchy eyes, and fatigue of seasonal hay fever. This isn't surprising given the fact that 1 cubic meter of air can contain thousands of pollen grains in the spring. When we inhale this pollen, our bodies react to the proteins within the pollen as if they were foreign pathogens. This may seem like pointless suffering, but there is a reason we should be grateful for the explosion of pollen. In this video, we will discuss pollen's diversity and its important role in plant reproduction and the creation of fruit. In our video on flowers, we discussed the formation of pollen grains in an anther. We also mentioned that sunflowers will release their pollen in a single aggregation called a pollinium. In the milkweed, 2 pollinia will be connected via translator arms to a single corpusculum to create a structure known as a pollinarium. The pollinaria will cling to the legs of a bee and be carried to another flower. Individual pollen grains have just as much diversity as flowers themselves, and we can use the unique sculpturing of the grain wall to identify plant species. All pollen grains will have an outer wall called an exine made up of sporopollenin. In monocot species, the exine is characterized by ciliate rods that make the surface look relatively smooth, while in eudicots, the exine has tectate rods with flat heads or spines that will make the surface appear bumpy and spiny. Monocot pollen will also have a single slit called a sulcus that will run from pole to pole on the pollen grain, while eudicot pollen will have slits called colpi that extend only to the grain equator. Finally, monocot pollen will have only one pore or none on its surface, while eudicot pollen can have multiple pores. We have also had a brief introduction to ovules when we talked about placentation in our flower video. The ovary of a flower can contain multiple ovules, which can be fertilized and mature to become seeds. Each ovule is connected to the ovarian tissue by a stalk called a funiculus. These structures are shown in their early forms in the cross-section at the bottom left. At the beginning of megasporogenesis, each ovule contains a diploid megasporocyte surrounded by a nucellus and 1 or 2 integuments. There's a small opening between the integuments called a micropyle, which will be necessary for the pollen tube to enter later during fertilization. The megasporocyte will divide by meiosis to produce 4 haploid cells, 3 of which will disintegrate, leaving a single haploid megaspore. Megagametogenesis begins when the megaspore undergoes 3 rounds of mitosis, resulting in the development of a megagametophyte and 8 haploid nuclei. These haploid nuclei will organize into groups. The antipodal cells are at the furthest end from the micropyle. The polar nuclei are in the center of the megagametophyte, and the egg cell and synergid cells are closest to the micropyle. This final 8-nucleate and 7-celled structure is called the embryo sac. Pollination occurs when a pollen grain lands on the stigma of a flower. The pollen grain will germinate and form a pollen tube that will reach down through the style and into the micropyles of each ovule, enabling the 2 sperm cells to reach the embryo sac. Once there, one of the sperm cells will unite with the egg, leading to the formation of the embryo, and the other sperm cell will unite with the 2 polar nuclei, resulting in the formation of a triploid endosperm that will nourish the embryo as it grows. This process is called double fertilization and is unique to angiosperms. After fertilization, the ovule will develop into a seed as the embryo matures and the integuments develop into a seed coat. The ovary, sometimes along with other parts of the flower or inflorescence, will develop into a fruit. Fruit can be broadly defined as a mature ovary along with any accessory tissue that becomes united with the ovary during maturation. The ovary wall, or pericarp, will thicken and differentiate into 3 layers during fruit development. The exocarp, made up of epidermal tissue, the mesocarp, made up of parenchyma and sclerenchyma, and the endocarp, made up of sclerenchyma that protects the seeds. Fruits can be categorized as fleshy or dry. Fleshy fruits include berries, drupes, and palms. Berries have more than 1 seed per fruit and are mostly fleshy besides their skin or rind-like exocarp. Drupes have a single carpel that produces a single seed surrounded by a bony endocarp. Palms arise from the epigynous or perigynous flowers, where the floral tube produces the bulk of the fleshy tissue and the carpels fuse to form a hard, thin, papery endocarp. Dry fruits include the follicle, legume, capsule, achene, nut, and caryopsis. Dehiscent fruits like the follicle, legume, and capsule will split to release their seeds, while indehiscent fruits will not split. Fruits can also be categorized as simple, aggregate, or multiple. A simple fruit, like a peach or tomato, will develop from either a single carpel or 2 or more united carpels. An aggregate fruit, like a raspberry, arises from multiple carpels in a single flower remaining ununited. Each carpel will develop into a fruitlet that, taken together, form the aggregate fruit. A multiple fruit, unlike an aggregate fruit, arises from multiple different flowers on a single inflorescence. Each gynoecium on each flower forms a fruit that will grow so close to the fruit next to it that we consider the whole inflorescence to become one fruit. A pineapple is one example of a multiple fruit. Additionally, fruits that contain tissue from any parts of the plant other than the ovary are called accessory fruits. These categorizations can overlap. For example, a strawberry is an accessory fruit because the fleshy body is made up of the ripened floral receptacle. But it is also an aggregate fruit, and each of its fruitlets, the tiny pits that we call seeds, are achenes. Finally, some fruits, like bananas, will develop without seeds because of meiotic dysfunctions. These fruits are called parthenocarpic fruits. Fruits and vegetables make up a large part of the human diet, but their production is under threat. Climate change, habitat destruction, and insecticide use have crippled certain bee populations. We need these pollinators to carry pollen from flower to flower and instigate flower reproduction and the production of fruits. Clearly, pollen and pollinators have a bigger impact on our lives than just hay fever.